trail camera footage of 8-foot creatures using tools and language in these mountains, and when I tracked them to their territory, I found government surveillance equipment that's been monitoring them since 1972. The classified documents I uncovered reveal 23 hidden populations across North America that have been buried for 50 years. October came early to the mountains last year. By the time Robert Crawford knocked on my cabin door, frost was already settling on the ridges most mornings. I'd known Robert for about 5 years, decent bow hunter, respected the land, kept to himself. The afternoon he showed up, something was wrong. Robert looked like he hadn't slept in days. Hands shaking as he pulled a small SD card from his jacket pocket. Didn't say much, just asked if I had a computer. I led him inside, fired up my old laptop, and watched as he inserted the card with fingers that trembled just enough to tell me this wasn't excitement. This was fear. Robert had been bow hunting up on Pigeon Ridge, a stretch of forest about 12 miles northeast of my property. Remote country, steep terrain, the kind of place most people avoid because the trails are rough and the hollows run dark, even at midday. 3 days earlier, he'd set up a trail camera near a natural spring to catch deer coming down to drink at dawn. What appeared on that screen made my chest tighten. The timestamp read 6:47 in the morning, October 18th. Dawn light filtered through morning mist. The frame showed the spring, a small pool surrounded by moss-covered rocks and fallen leaves. For the first few seconds, nothing moved except the gentle drift of fog. Then came the movement at the tree line. My first thought was bear, the gait, the size, the way it emerged from the shadows. But as the figure moved into clearer view, every assumption I'd held for 3 decades shattered. This was no bear. The creature stood upright, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair that caught the morning light. Shoulders were massive, arms hung longer than any human's, and the way it moved, purposeful, deliberate, scanning the terrain with obvious intelligence, raised every hair on the back of my neck. But here's what had stopped my breath. The first creature wasn't alone. A second figure emerged from the mist, smaller, but still over 6 feet tall. And then a third, juvenile by the looks of it, maybe 4.5 feet tall, staying close to what I could only assume was its mother. They were a family unit, moving together, communicating through subtle gestures, heading toward the spring with the confidence of creatures who knew this territory intimately. Robert and I watched that 43-second clip in complete silence. When it ended, he looked at me with eyes that begged for a rational explanation. My mouth had gone dry. 32 years in these mountains. My grandfather worked these ridges in the 60s, taught me about reading signs, about respecting what you don't fully understand. He used to tell me stories about things that moved through the high country that weren't bear or elk or anything with a name. Stories about what the old-timers called Sasquatch. I always thought they were just stories. I was wrong. Told Robert to keep this quiet until I could verify what we were seeing. The last thing we needed was every amateur Bigfoot hunter in 3 states descending on Pigeon Ridge with cameras and calling cards. But I needed to see this for myself. Trail camera footage can be dismissed, explained away. But if I could get up to that ridge, find physical evidence, that would change everything. Robert gave me the GPS coordinates. Pigeon Ridge, eastern slope, 3,400 feet elevation. Also told me he'd pulled the camera. Too spooked to go back. Sleep didn't come that night. I kept watching that video, frame by frame. The way the large male paused at second 31, turning his head directly toward the camera. Not a random glance, a deliberate assessment. He knew the camera was there, evaluated whether it posed a threat, concluded it didn't, and moved on. That level of awareness indicated intelligence far beyond what science officially acknowledges exists in any known North American species, including what researchers have historically categorized as Bigfoot sightings. Enhanced the background using basic image software. 60 yards behind the family, barely visible through the trees. Something made my pulse quicken. A structure, not natural windfall. Bent saplings forming a deliberate lean-to configuration against a rock outcrop. Someone, or something, had built shelter in that hollow. This family wasn't just passing through. They lived there. By first light, my pack was ready. Motion-activated camera, audio equipment, binoculars, compass, maps, supplies for a full day in rough country. Also packed my sidearm and bear spray, though I had no illusions either. Would matter much if an 8-foot creature with that strength decided I was a threat. I didn't tell Robert what I was planning. If something happened to me, he needed deniability. I wrote a note explaining everything and left it in my desk drawer. 2 researchers in the 90s had gotten too interested in unusual activity on Pigeon Ridge. The Forest Service said they got lost, bodies never found, but I had to go anyway. The hike to Pigeon Ridge took 3 hours of steady climbing. By the time I reached the spring at 7:30, sweat was soaking through my shirt. Set up my equipment, positioning my camera to cover the same angle, placing the audio recorder near the water, then settling behind a rock outcrop about 30 yards from the spring. The forest around me was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a healthy woodland, but the tense silence that comes when prey animals sense a predator nearby. Birds weren't singing. 90 minutes passed, barely moved, controlling my breathing, watching the tree line. Nothing appeared, but I wasn't disappointed. What I needed was to find their trail, locate that shelter, understand their territory. Moving slowly, I approached where the creatures had entered the frame. Within minutes, I found what I was searching for. A track, pressed into mud near a small seep, clear as any evidence I'd ever documented. 16 inches long from heel to toe, 5 distinct toe impressions, the outline of a broad, flat foot, adapted for both bipedal walking and gripping uneven terrain. The track was fresh, edges still sharp. Photographed it from multiple angles, placed my knife beside it for scale. The deepest impression was at the heel and ball of the foot, consistent with a walking stride. The creature had been moving calmly through its territory. The track line led up slope, followed it carefully. Broken branches at 7 to 8 feet high, where something tall had pushed through. Disturbed leaf litter, suggesting regular use. This was a trail, not a random path. 60 yards up the slope, the forest opened into a small clearing, dominated by a massive rock overhang, and there, exactly where I'd spotted it in the enhanced footage, stood the shelter. Living maple saplings, still green and flexible, had been bent and woven together to form a lean-to against the rock face. The technique required understanding of which trees could be bent without breaking, knowledge of how to secure them, and planning about orientation. I approached slowly, announcing my presence with deliberate footsteps. The shelter was empty, but clearly in use. Inside, compressed leaves and moss arranged to form bedding. Smooth river stones placed near the opening in a deliberate arrangement. Some held traces of crushed acorn shells. The whole area smelled of something I couldn't quite identify. Closest comparison? Wet dog, but deeper, almost sweet underneath the musk, like overripe fruit mixed with damp fur. The smell of something that didn't fit into any category I knew. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was a home maintained by intelligent beings who understood shelter construction, food processing, and territorial selection, which meant they'd be back, and I was standing in their living room. Moving in a wider circle, I started noticing territorial markers, the kind predator species use to define their range. Only these weren't typical bear or mountain lion markings. These were different, deliberate, intelligent. The first one appeared about 100 yards from the shelter. A young pine tree, maybe 6 inches in diameter, snapped clean at 8 feet high. The break was fresh, maybe a week old. But the tree hadn't just broken. It had been twisted. As it snapped, the wood showing a spiral fracture pattern that required enormous strength. Something had grabbed that tree and deliberately twisted it until it failed. While I was at their shelter, they were out here, watching me. Close enough to twist a 6-inch tree trunk, like a twig. Found 3 more within the next hour, each positioned at roughly 200-yard intervals, forming a perimeter. Same height, same twisting break pattern. Territorial boundaries maintained and refreshed regularly. Then came the rock stacks. 4 separate piles, each exactly 3 stones high, placed on prominent boulders where they'd be visible from multiple angles. Someone had carried them from the stream bed below, selected them for uniform size, and stacked them with care. The most compelling marker appeared near the northern edge, a stripped sapling, bark peeled away in a specific pattern, hung from a low branch with the exposed white wood facing downslope. It looked almost like trailblazes from Native American territorial marking, but fresh. The exposed wood still showed sap. Standing in that hollow, surrounded by evidence of deliberate territorial maintenance, I did the math. If this was a family group, male, female, juvenile, but the territorial markers suggested coordination across several square miles, there had to be more individuals involved. 6 to 8 individuals minimum, not just a family, a community. That's when the sound cut through the silence. From about 300 yards upslope, a vocalization unlike anything in my 32 years. Long and low, starting around the pitch of a foghorn, but with a rising and falling modulation that carried intelligence, intention. Lasted about 4 seconds, echoing off the ridges. Something in between a howl and a call that resonated in my chest. My breath caught. Recording equipment was running. 10 seconds passed, maybe 20, felt like an hour. Then, from across the valley to the southwest, an answer. Shorter duration, lower in pitch, but unmistakably a response. They were communicating. And then a third vocalization from the northwest, higher pitched, possibly the juvenile or female. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure they could hear it. Every muscle locked. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. But I forced myself to stay still, barely breathing, while they coordinated around me. The calls continued for almost 3 minutes, back and forth between at least 3 distinct sources, positioned roughly a mile apart, in a triangle that encompassed my location. They knew I was here. They'd known from the moment I entered their territory. These vocalizations weren't alarm calls. They were coordinated, information exchange, possibly a discussion about what to do about the human in their home range. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of hiding, I moved deliberately, making noise with my footsteps, allowing them to track me as I slowly made my way back down slope. By the time I reached the spring, the vocalizations had stopped. Packed my gear, reviewing the audio I'd captured. 2.5 hours in their territory, and I'd gathered enough evidence to prove, at least to myself, that what people have been calling Bigfoot for generations was living in these mountains, maintaining territory, raising young, and communicating with sophistication that suggested language. But here's what made my hands shake. They'd let me leave. These creatures had surrounded my position, monitored my every move, discussed my presence, and then, allowed me to walk out unharmed. They could have approached me, driven me away, even hurt me. They chose not to. That kind of restraint spoke to intelligence I wasn't prepared to comprehend. Got back just before dark, exhausted but unable to rest. My mind kept replaying everything. The coordinated vocalizations, the deliberate decision to let me leave safely. This was contact with an intelligent species. The next morning, Robert called. His voice was tight. He'd heard from a friend whose property bordered Pigeon Ridge. The Federal Forestry Service had shown up 2 days after my hike with specialized equipment. They shut down the entire eastern slope, posted warning signs, installed monitoring cameras, and banned all public entry. Official explanation: aggressive bear activity. But there hadn't been any bear problems on Pigeon Ridge in 5 years. Made some calls to contacts I'd developed over my years guiding. What I learned from a forestry ranger I'd known for a decade. Someone willing to talk only because he was retiring in 6 months. Stopped me cold. The team hadn't come to investigate. They'd come to contain. 400 yards above the shelter I'd found, they discovered a structure that made that lean-to look like a child's fort. Built into a cliff, overhang 15 feet off the ground, accessible by a ladder system made from stripped branches wedged into rock crevices. Inside, woven bedding, food storage in bark containers, and primitive tools. Rocks shaped for grinding, sharp stones for cutting. My contact had been working these mountains for 28 years and had never seen anything like it. The construction showed understanding of engineering principles. The food storage suggested seasonal planning. The tools indicated the ability to imagine a future need and create an instrument to meet it. And the agency's response wasn't an investigation. It was suppressed, started digging deeper. What I learned shook everything I thought I understood. This wasn't a recent discovery being hidden. This was a long-term cover-up maintained across decades. Got my hands on an incident report from 1978 through a retired ranger who'd kept personal archives. The document was marked for internal use only. Multiple encounters with large bipedal creatures in the Pigeon Ridge area, documented footprint casts, photographic evidence never released, and formal recommendation for what they called quiet observation and non-interference protocols. But the file mentioned vocalizations. The 1978 team had recorded calls at night, analyzed their patterns, noted them as non-human primate vocalizations from an unknown source. They'd included spectral analysis data, frequency ranges, duration patterns, coordinated communication, loaded the audio I'd captured into sound analysis software, and pulled up the 1978 data. Hands were shaking as I overlaid the two waveforms. Perfect match. Identical. The same 80 to 87 Hz range. The same 4-second initial call with rising and falling pitch. The same 2-second response. The same triangulation pattern. These creatures were using the exact same communication protocol 47 years later. This wasn't instinct. This was learned behavior, passed down through generations like language in human cultures. Cultural transmission. The preservation of communication patterns across nearly half a century meant these beings had society, tradition, and education of their young. The 1978 report also noted peak activity times, 10 at night to 2 in the morning, with vocalizations concentrated near water. Sources. I'd only been observing during daylight. If I wanted to truly understand what was happening, I needed to return after dark. Planned carefully. New moon phase for maximum darkness, thermal imaging equipment, night vision optics, audio recording setup. Choose a Tuesday night the following week. Hiked up in late afternoon, set up behind the same rock outcrop. By full dark, I was operating entirely on night vision and thermal imaging. 90 minutes in position, where my thermal scope picked up mouvement. 3 heat signatures, bright white against the cool background. 1 large shape, approximately 8 feet tall, 1 medium at 6 to 7 feet, and 1 small at 4 to 5 feet. They were coming toward the spring in single file formation. Through the thermal scope, I watched their heat patterns, warmer at the core, cooler at the extremities. They moved with purpose, but without hurry, navigating obstacles in complete darkness with confidence. 11:47, when they reached the spring, held absolutely still, thermal camera recording everything. The large individual stood at the water's edge, head scanning, checking the perimeter. The medium and small individuals moved to the water, and through my scope I could see them drinking, the small one splashing playfully. Then something remarkable happened. The medium individual, the female, moved along the bank, appearing to gather something. Through night vision, I could see her examining objects, selecting some and rejecting others. She placed her gathered materials into something she was carrying, a container, woven from plant materials. The large male maintained his watchful position. Then the small one found something and approached the female with it. Through night vision, I could make out what it was, a plastic water bottle. The juvenile picked it up, examined it, and showed it to the female. The female took the bottle, looked it over. Then she did something that made my breath catch. She walked deliberately to a flat rock near the trail and placed the bottle on it, not tossing it aside, placing it, positioning it carefully where it would be visible. Then she reached into her container, pulled out something small, and arranged it next to the bottle. Stayed at the spring for 12 minutes total, then moved upslope. Waited 30 minutes after they disappeared before I moved. The cold had settled into my bones, but I moved carefully to the flat rock. Next to the plastic bottle, she'd left a cluster of blackberries, perfectly arranged. The implication hit me like a physical force. They knew humans visited this spring. They'd found our trash, and they were responding, not with aggression or fear, with communication, an exchange. This wasn't random behavior. This was symbolic communication. They were reaching out, trying to establish some form of contact or coexistence protocol. Made a decision that might have been foolish, but felt right. Took the berries and the bottle. Then left my own items in exchange, 2 granola bars and a small folding knife. If they were offering communication, I wanted to respond. Then I packed my equipment and hiked back down in darkness. 7 days later, I hiked back up in the late afternoon. My heart was pounding as I approached the flat rock. The items were gone. In their place, something that confirmed everything I'd begun to suspect. A bundle of straight sticks, stripped completely of bark, all cut to exactly the same length, 14 inches each, and bound together with twisted plant fiber. Someone had selected branches, removed the bark, ensured identical length, then bound them with cordage they'd created. This was manufactured goods, created with planning and craft. Next to the stick bundle sat an arrangement of river stones in a perfect circular pattern, with a piece of white quartz in the center. And then the item that made my hands shake. A carving in soft wood. 2 figures, one small and human proportioned, one tall and broad, standing side by side. I had to sit down. Legs just gave out. Everything I'd been taught about intelligence, about what makes something human. It was all wrong. Sat there, trying to process what it meant that these beings could communicate symbolically, could recognize us as different but equal, could create art expressing abstract concepts like coexistence. The message was clear. You and us, different, together. Fresh tracks surrounded the rock, multiple individuals, all from the previous night. They'd come together, several members of their community, to create and leave this response. We weren't alone. We'd never been alone. And someone had decided we shouldn't know. If this evidence is changing how you see these mountains, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to know the truth. Because what comes next goes even deeper. That's when I remembered something from the 1978 report. A brief mention about gift exchanges at this exact location. The government team had documented instances of items being left and exchanged. They'd recorded it, studied it, and then classified it. This communication protocol had been happening for at least 47 years. Reached back out to my retired ranger contact. We arranged to meet farther from the mountains. He was getting nervous, mentioning he'd found a GPS tracker on his truck. Dennis Hayes met me at a truck stop diner off Interstate 40, 200 miles from Pigeon Ridge, at midnight. Looked over his shoulder 3 times before sitting down. "You need to understand something," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "People have lost their careers for less than what's in here. Some have lost more than that." He lifted his hand off the folder. "Read it fast. I need it back in 20 minutes. After tonight, we never met." The first page made my blood run cold. 2 words at the top. "Project Sentinel," Dennis explained in a low voice. He'd kept 1 file. Made a copy 20 years ago. Stashed it away as insurance. This is the only physical copy outside government archives. After tonight, you've never seen it. The document referenced something initiated in 1972 by the United States Forest Service, working with the Department of the Interior. The project's objective was to monitor and protect indigenous North American hominid populations from human interference and public discovery. Indigenous, hominids, populations, plural. I had to read that line 3 times. The government had known for over 50 years that these beings existed, classified them not as unknown animals, but as human relatives, and made an organized decision to keep their existence secret. 23 zones. Last time I saw updated data. 23. Not just Pigeon Ridge. They'd been tracking populations from here to the Pacific. Everything researchers and Sasquatch investigators had been piecing together for decades. The government already had the full picture, documented and classified. Each zone was designated with a number and given a population estimate. Pigeon Ridge was listed as Zone 17, described as a breeding population, estimated at 8 to 12 individuals, classified as stable, non-aggressive, and isolated. The protocol was consistent. No public disclosure, no scientific publication, minimal interference, and active suppression of civilian evidence. The file included evidence I never thought I'd see. Thermal photographs from 1974 showing large bipedal heat signatures, plaster casts of footprints, hair sample analysis concluding unknown hominid, genetically divergent from modern humans approximately 800,000 years ago. They weren't classified as apes. They were human relatives, an ancient branch of the human family tree that had never gone extinct. Found the section that explained everything. If these beings were officially classified as a distinct hominid species related to humans, they would qualify for protection under multiple frameworks. The Endangered Species Act would immediately designate their habitat as critical, making any development or resource extraction illegal. That alone would impact millions of acres. But it went deeper. As original inhabitants, predating modern human settlement by potentially hundreds of thousands of years, they could theoretically claim indigenous status, territorial rights, land claims that would supersede every modern deed and title. Dennis leaned in. You understand what that means? Every logging operation, every mining permit, every development project, all of it would stop. The economic impact runs into the hundreds of billions. So they made a choice. Protect these beings by denying they exist. It's not a conspiracy to hide monsters. It's a conspiracy to hide people who have more legitimate claim to these mountains than any deed or title we can produce. The people running Project Sentinel at the highest levels. They've made people disappear before. You go public, you become a problem. I need to see the surveillance. Long silence. Then Dennis pulled out a thumb drive. Sample files. After tonight, destroy this. If you want to see where this investigation leads, and what the government doesn't want discovered, subscribe now. What comes next will make you question everything you've been told. Spent the next week reviewing the data. Time-stamped videos from hidden cameras spanning 2018 to 2023. Audio files. Thermal tracking. Even an academic-level behavioral study titled Social Structure Analysis, written by government researchers who would never be allowed to publish. The footage showed the family over years. The juvenile I'd seen had been an infant in 2018. Over 5 years, I watched that infant grow, learn to walk, and begin foraging. Watched the male and female maintaining and expanding the cliff dwelling. Saw seasonal migration patterns as they moved to lower elevations during harsh winters. The behavioral observations were remarkable. The surveillance documented them, foraging over 50 different plant species. Tool use was common. Rocks for cracking nuts, sharp stones for processing, digging sticks. They cached food during abundant seasons, showing planning for future scarcity. But the most compelling evidence was in the audio analysis. Government linguists had identified 26 distinct call types, structured communication with specific meanings, warning calls, greetings, distress signals, food-finding announcements. The calls showed syntax, structure, context-dependent usage, everything that defines language. One video file stopped me cold, dated August 2022, showing the female and juvenile in the spring. The juvenile picked up a crushed aluminum can. The female examined it, then demonstrated how to flatten it further and place it in a specific rock crevice, where other human refuse had been collected. She was teaching, showing the young one how to manage human intrusion, how to clean our garbage from their territory. And the government had documented all of it and kept it absolutely secret. These were monitored, studied, thoroughly documented people whose existence remained classified because acknowledging them would require changing everything about how we use these mountains. But the surveillance data also revealed something that made my chest tighten. Population decline. Zone 17 had been estimated at 15 to 18 individuals in 1972. The current estimate was 8 to 12. They'd lost a third to half their population over 50 years. And this pattern was consistent across all monitored zones. Despite government protection, despite decades of study, these populations were shrinking. The causes were complex. Habitat fragmentation was primary. Roads cutting migration corridors, development isolating populations, logging destroying foraging areas. Each zone was becoming an island, with no way for genetic exchange. They were trapped, breeding with relatives. The Zone 17 family showed signs of this. The male and female were likely related. The juvenile showed markers of reduced genetic diversity. But the most concerning data point was reproduction rate. The female had produced only 2 offspring in 15 years. The previous generation had shown intervals of 5 to 7 years. The current trend suggested declining fertility. Low birth rate, combined with isolated populations and habitat loss, equals extinction trajectory. The government wasn't just hiding these beings. They were watching them slowly vanish. Every metric pointed downward, and the protection strategy, keep them hidden, isolated, was contributing to their demise. They needed connected habitat corridors. They needed expanded protected territories. They needed intervention, not just observation. But providing those things would require acknowledging their existence. So the government watched them decline, documented every step, and maintained the lie. Thought about the carved figure the female had left, the two forms standing side by side, different, but together, a message of peaceful coexistence. And I thought about the government's response, surveillance, documentation, and silence. We'd been given an opportunity for genuine contact with an intelligent species, and we'd chosen secrecy and slow extinction. That's when I understood what I needed to do. The government's strategy was failing. The populations were declining. Maybe exposure was the risk they needed. Maybe public knowledge was the only force strong enough to demand comprehensive habitat protection. Because if people knew what I knew, they might demand action. But that meant breaking 50 years of government secrecy. That meant putting myself in the crosshairs of agencies that had made people disappear. I thought about the Zone 17 family, about the juvenile approaching, breeding age, with no unrelated mates, about the female who'd left me berries and a carved message, about the newborn whose footprint I'd found. They deserved better than extinction in secrecy. They deserved to be known, not as myths or monsters, but as the people they are. Decided to return to Pigeon Ridge one more time, just to check on the family. Hiked up 3 days ago. The forest felt different, emptier. The territorial markers were still there, but they looked old. The twisted trees showed weathering. The rock stacks had been disturbed. No fresh markers. When I reached the clearing, my worst fears were confirmed. Abandoned. The structure was there, but no longer occupied. The bedding was old. The food cache is empty. The tools are gone. The family had left. Found their tracks leading north, out of Zone 17 territory, toward higher elevations, where the terrain gets rougher. Followed the trail for 2 miles until it crossed onto private land, recently purchased for development. Survey stakes marked property lines. Access roads roughed in. A sign announced luxury subdivision construction starting next spring. The family was being squeezed out. Development from the south, surveillance from the east, new construction planned from the north. They had nowhere to go except deeper into the mountains where food is scarcer and winters are harsh. And they were making that retreat with a newborn. Found the evidence at the edge of the development site. A perfect 16-inch footprint from the adult male. And next to it, tiny and heartbreaking, a print maybe 6 inches long. The female had given birth recently. The family now numbered 4 individuals, possibly their last generation. I stood there looking at those tracks. Grief, anger, but underneath determination, because that newborn won't survive winter in that terrain. I have until first snow, maybe 6 weeks, to find where they've gone and either help them establish new territory or get them. Connected to another group. Spent a week tracking those prints heading north. They led into the most remote country I've ever seen. Territory so rough I couldn't follow on foot. But I found something else up there. Another shelter. Fresh. But this one wasn't built by the Zone 17 family. The construction was different, more sophisticated. The markers used patterns I hadn't seen. Rock arrangements in complex geometric designs. There's another group up there. Based on the tracks, they're bigger. More of them. And unlike the family I'd been watching, these ones haven't been habituated to humans. This might be what Bigfoot researchers have been searching for all along. An uncontacted population that's remained completely hidden from modern civilization. found 7 distinct track sizes, a larger community, and the dwelling wasn't just a shelter, it was a compound. Multiple structures, connected pathways, storage areas. Everything suggests permanent settlement. They're thriving in territory so remote that human encroachment hasn't reached them yet. And if I can get the Zone 17 family connected with this group before winter, that newborn might have a chance. Fresh genetic material, a larger population, a future. I'm going back up there in the spring. Because I started this investigation when Robert showed me footage of something that shouldn't exist. What I found was government surveillance programs running for over 50 years. 23 distinct populations across North America. Evidence of intelligence, culture, language, and society in beings officially denied to exist. And a pattern of population decline, suggesting we're watching human relatives go extinct while pretending they were never here. The Zone 17 family is now displaced, wandering marginal habitat with a newborn facing winter. 22 other populations face similar pressures. But there's a second group up in that northern territory. Bigger, stronger, uncontacted. And that changes everything. This investigation isn't over. It's just beginning. Drop a comment below. What do you think these beings really are? And would you risk everything to protect them? Because that newborn up there in the high country is running out of time. And come spring, I'll find out if we're alone in deciding whether they survive or vanish forever.